Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to a series of videos in which I am reading you a book. We are reading Barchester Towers by Anthony Trollope, and I have been a little tardy, a little spotty in this. I'm not beating myself up about it because I figure it can all be fixed when somebody makes a playlist. Then it won't matter. You'll still be able to binge these things and listen to me go on about this book because, unfortunately, I'm not just reading you Barchester Towers, which is in the public domain. I'm sure you can get a LibriVox recording of this thing. I'm also interpolating many Steve editorial comments. I don't seem to be able to help myself. So we are slowly approaching the end of this book. Trollope doesn't have long to go. He wants to take his leisurely time wrapping up all of the major plot lines that he has set up in this book. And by this point in the book, you're wondering how many of them he's actually going to do that with. One of the major ones, the major one we'll deal with today, we just had what I view as the climax of this book. A massive breakfast party at Ullathorne Estate where all the principal characters arrived. They were all there together. All the characters from all of our various plot lines were there. And a whole bunch of things happened. Everybody learns that the Dean of Barchester has died at long last after having a bad stroke. He is dead, so the position of Dean is now open. Mr. Slope, the new bishop's odious chaplain, pitches woo to the wealthy widow Eleanor Bold and puts his hand around her waist, whereupon she belts him. Also, as if she runs straight from that horrific encounter into the arms of Bertie Stanhope, the son of another cleric in the Barchester bureaucracy, who likewise pitches woo to her, but in an even weirder way. She didn't see Mr. Slope's proposition coming. And she doesn't see Bertie Stanhope's proposition coming either, but his is even worse because he's been told by his sister Charlotte to propose to Eleanor Bold because he needs money or he's going to go broke completely. He's just going to be destroyed, a ruined man. And she's wealthy. But he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to be married to anybody. It seems like work to him. And the minute something seems like work to Bertie Stanhope, he doesn't want to do it anymore. And so he doesn't do what a normal person would do and simply not propose to her or botch his proposal. Instead, he tells her, I don't really mean it. I don't want to marry you, but I'm wondering if you could lie to my family and tell them that I made an earnest proposal and you earnestly turned me down. She's horrified. This day could not have been worse for her. In addition to everything else, Bertie Stanhope's sister, the Signora, Madeline Vesey Stanhope, she's this alluring temptress. She's crippled, but she's an alluringly beautiful temptress who learned all of her ways in Italy and casts a spell over every man who comes anywhere near her. And she casts a spell at the Ullathorne party over Mr. Arabin, who we've been told many times before, and we wouldn't have needed Trollope to tell us, is in love with Eleanor Bold, and she's in love with him. So not only does she get groped by Mr. Slope, and not only does she get told by Bertie Stanhope that, I'd rather lie to my family than go through the ordeal of marrying you, but also she sees Mr. Arabin doting over the Signora. It's a horrible time for her. And she's just facing the worst of it, thinking, how am I going to get back home? I can't walk. She could walk. She's not made of glass. She could walk. Elizabeth Bennet would have walked. But she's got to get in a carriage with somebody. Bertie Stanhope, in his last act of gallantry before we say goodbye to him, takes care of that and gets her dropped off at her door after a tense carriage ride with Dr. Vesey Stanhope, who at least hasn't proposed marriage to Eleanor. But this chapter, the chapter we're going to read today, follows Eleanor home. Just keeping in mind that everything about her has been shattered. Every belief that she's ever had has been shattered. She's already said to us that she will never take any man's part again in the world. She's as disillusioned as she could be. Waiting at home for her is the sister of her dead husband, and also her little boy, Johnny Bold, the baby. The baby is waiting at home. So prepare yourself for that. This is chapter 44, Mrs. Bold at Home. Poor Mrs. Bold, when she got home from Ullathorne on the evening of Miss Thorne's party, was very unhappy, and moreover very tired. Nothing fatigues the body so much as weariness of spirit, and Eleanor's spirit was indeed weary. Dr. Stanhope had civilly but not very cordially asked her in to tea, and her manner of refusal convinced the worthy doctor that he need not repeat the invitation. She's already told Bertie Stanhope, I think it best if all my intercourse with your family cease immediately. As well it should. The whole family was in on it. The whole family was in on making Bertie nice to her so that she would be in a position to be wooed by him for money. Of course she should drop them. He had not exactly made himself a party to the intrigue which was to convert the late Mrs. Bold's patrimony into an income for his hopeful son, but he had been well aware of what was going on. And he was well aware also, when he perceived that Bertie declined accompanying them home in the carriage, that the affair had gone off. Eleanor was very much afraid that Charlotte would have darted out upon her as the prebendary got out of his own door, but Bertie had thoughtfully saved her from this by causing the carriage to go round to her own house. This also Dr. Stanhope understood and allowed to pass without remark. When she got home, she found Mary Bold in the drawing room with the child in her lap. She rushed forward and, throwing herself on her knees, kissed the little fellow till she almost frightened him. "Oh, Mary, I am so glad you did not go. It was an odious party." Now, the question of Mary's going had been one greatly mooted between them. Mrs. Bold, when invited, had been the guest of the Grantleys, and Miss Thorne, who had chiefly known Eleanor as at the hospital or at Plumstead Rectory, had forgotten all about Mary Bold. Her sister-in-law had implored her to go under her wing and had offered to write to Miss Thorne or call on her, but Miss Bold had declined. In fact, Mr. Bold had not been very popular with such people as the Thornes, and his sister would not go among them unless she were specially asked to do so. "Well then," said Mary cheerfully, "I have less to regret." She thinks that Eleanor Bold is saying it was horrible, just the way people do. Oh, what a beastly party, when actually she loved it. "You have nothing to regret, but oh, Mary, I have so much, so much." Then she began kissing her boy, whom her caresses had roused from his slumbers. When she raised her head, Mary saw that the tears were running down her cheeks. "Good heavens, Eleanor, what is the matter? What has happened to you? Eleanor, dearest Eleanor, what is the matter?" said Mary, and got up with the boy still in her arms. Give him to me, said the young mother. "Give him to me, Mary," and she almost tore the child out of her sister's arms. The poor little fellow murmured somewhat at the disturbance, but nevertheless nestled himself close into his mother's bosom. "Here, Mary, take the cloak from me, my own darling, darling, darling jewel. You are not false to me. Everybody else is false. Everybody else is cruel. Mamma will care for nobody but her own little man." Again she kissed and pressed the baby, and cried till the tears ran down over the child's face. "Who has been cruel to you, Eleanor?" said Mary. "I hope I have not." Now, in this matter, Eleanor had great cause for mental uneasiness. She could not certainly accuse her loving sister-in-law of cruelty, but she had to do that which was more galling. She had to accuse herself of imprudence, against which her sister-in-law had warned her. She's worried about "I told you so." She's not going to get them from anybody that she's worried about them from, but she's worried about them, and it's galling to admit that Mary Bold was right. Miss Bold had never encouraged Eleanor's acquaintance with Mr. Slope, and she had positively discouraged the friendship of the Stanhopes as far as her usual gentle mode of speaking had permitted. Eleanor had only laughed at her, however, and when she said that she disapproved of married women who lived apart from their husbands, and suggested that Charlotte Stanhope never went to church. The married women who never live apart from their husbands is the Signora, whose husband has not made the scene yet. Now, however, Eleanor must either hold her tongue, which was quite impossible, or confess herself to have been utterly wrong, which was nearly equally so. So she staved off the evil day by more tears, and consoled herself by inducing little Johnny to rouse himself sufficiently to return her caresses. "He is a darling, as true as gold. What would Mamma do without him? Mamma would lie down and die if she had not her own Johnny Bold to give her comfort." This and much more she said of the same kind, and for a time made no other answer to Mary's inquiries. This kind of consolation from the world's deceit is very common. Trollope has decided to put on his lecture hat, so brace yourself. This kind of consolation from the world's deceit is very common. Mothers obtain it from their children, and men from their dogs. Some men even do so from their walking sticks, which is just as rational. How is it that we can take joy to ourselves in that we are not deceived by those who have not attained the art to deceive us? In a true man, if such can be found, or true woman, much consolation may indeed be taken. Can you think of a difference between a walking stick and a dog, Tony? Anyway, in the caresses of her child, however, Eleanor did not receive consolation. Or she did receive consolation, and may ill befall the man who would begrudge it to her. The evil day, however, was only postponed. She had to tell her disagreeable tale to Mary, and she also had to tell it to her father. Must it not, indeed, be told to the whole circle of her acquaintances before she could be made to stand all right with them? At the present moment there was no one to whom she could turn for comfort. She hated Mr. Slope. That was a matter of course. And in that feeling she revelled. She hated and despised the Stanhopes. But that feeling distressed her greatly. She had, as it were, separated herself from her old friends to throw herself into the arms of this family. And how had they then intended to use her? She could hardly reconcile herself to her own father, who had believed ill of her. Marybold had turned mentor. That she could have forgiven had mentor turned out to be in the wrong, but mentors in the right are not to be pardoned. She could not but hate the archdeacon, and she now hated him worse than ever, for she must in some sort humble herself before him. She hated her sister, for she was part and parcel of the archdeacon, and she would have hated Mr. Arabin if she could. He had pretended to regard her, and yet before her face he had hung over that Italian woman as though there had been no other beauty in the world but hers. No other woman worth a moment's attention, and Mr. Arabin would have to learn all about Mr. Slope. She told herself that she hated him, and she knew that she was lying to herself as she did so. She had no consolation but her baby, and of that she made the most. Mary, though she could not surmise what it was that had so violently affected her sister-in-law, saw at once that her grief was too great to be kept under control, and waited patiently till the child should be in his cradle. "You'll have some tea, Eleanor." "Oh, I don't care," she said, although in fact she must have been very hungry, for she'd eaten nothing at Ullathorne. She hasn't eaten all day. Mary quietly made the tea, and buttered the bread, and laid aside a cloak, and made things look comfortable. "He's fast asleep," she said. "You're very tired. Let me take him up to bed." But Eleanor would not let her sister touch him. She looked wistfully at the baby's eyes, saw that they were lost in the deepest slumber, and then made a sort of couch for him on the sofa. She was determined that nothing could prevail upon her to let him out of her sight that night. "Come, Nellie," said Mary, "don't be cross with me. I at least have done nothing to offend you." "I aren't cross," said Eleanor. "Are you angry, then? Surely you can't be angry with me." "No, I aren't angry, at least not with you." "If you are not, drink the tea I've made for you. I'm sure you must want it." Eleanor did drink it, and allowed herself to be persuaded. She ate and drank, and as the inner woman was recruited, she felt a little more charitable towards the world at large. At last she found the words to begin her story, and before she went to bed, she had made a clean breast of it and told everything. Everything, that is, to the lovers that she had rejected. Of Mr. Arabin she said not a word. "I know I was wrong," said she, speaking of the blow she had given to Mr. Slope, "but I didn't know what he might do, and I had to protect myself." "He richly deserved it," said Mary. "Deserved it," said Eleanor, whose mind, as regarded Mr. Slope, was almost bloodthirsty. "Had I stabbed him with a dagger, he would have deserved it. But what will they say about it at Plumstead?" "I don't think I should tell them," said Mary. Eleanor began to think she would not. "He won't mention it. If she doesn't, no one needs to know." There could have been no kinder comfort than Marybold. There was not the slightest dash of triumph about her when she heard of the Stanhope scheme, nor did she allude to her former opinion when Eleanor called her late friend Charlotte a base, designing woman. She re-echoed all the abuse that had been heaped on Mr. Slope's head, and never hinted that she had said as much before. "I told you so, I told you so," is the croak of a true Job's comforter. But Mary, when she found her friend lying in her sorrow and scraping herself with potsherds, forbore to argue and to exult. Eleanor acknowledged the merit of the forbearance, and at length she allowed herself to be tranquilized. On the next day she did not go out of the house. Barchester she thought would be crowded with Stanhopes and Slopes. Perhaps also with Arabins and Grantleys. Indeed, there was hardly anyone among her friends whom she could have met without some cause of uneasiness. But in the course of the afternoon she heard that the Dean was dead. And she also heard that Mr. Quiverful had been finally appointed to the hospital, over her father, over Mr. Harding. In the evening her father came to her, and then the story, or as much of it as she could bring herself to tell him, had to be repeated. He was not in truth much surprised at Mr. Slope's effrontery, but he was obliged to act as though he had been, to save his daughter's feelings. He was, however, anything but skillful in his deceit, and she saw through it. "I see," said she, "that you think it only the common course of things that Mr. Slope should have treated me in this way." She had said nothing to him about the embrace, nor yet any way in which it had been meant. "I do not think it at all strange," said he, "that anyone should admire my Eleanor." That's all she told him, is that Mr. Slope proposed or admired her. "It is strange to me," said she, "that any man should have so much audacity without ever having received the slightest encouragement." To this Mr. Harding answered nothing, because the whole question, the whole issue between her and all these people in Plumstead Episcopi is that they think she has been encouraging him. To this Mr. Harding answered nothing. With the Archdeacon, it would have been a test for a rejoinder that would have disgraced Bildad the Shuhite. Probably a very biblical frame of mind here. The point being, Mr. Harding doesn't find it hard to let that, without a single word of encouragement, pass by without comment, but Archdeacon Grantley would certainly have pounced upon it. But you'll tell the Archdeacon? Asked Mr. Harding. Tell him what? She said sharply. Or Susan? That's her sister, the Archdeacon's wife. Continued Mr. Harding. You'll tell Susan. You'll let them know that they wronged you in supposing this man's addresses would be agreeable to you. They may find out in their own way, said she. I shall not ever willingly mention Mr. Slope's name to either of them. But I may? I have no right to hinder you from doing anything that may be necessary to your own comfort, but pray do not do it for my sake. Dr. Grantley never thought well of me, and never will. I don't know now that I am even anxious that he ever should do so. And then they went off to the affair of the hospital. But is it true, Papa? What, my dear? Said he. About the Dean? Yes, I fear quite true. Indeed, I know there is no doubt about it. Poor Miss Trefoil. I am so sorry for her, but I did not mean that, said Eleanor. About the hospital, I mean, Papa. Oh, my dear, I believe it is true that Mr. Quiverful is to have it. Oh, what a shame. No, my dear, not at all a shame. I am sure, I hope it will suit him. But, Papa, you know it is a shame. After all your hopes, all your expectations to get back in your old house, to see it given away in this way to a perfect stranger? My dear, the bishop had every right to give it to whom he pleased. I deny that, Papa. He had no such right. It is not as though you were a candidate for a new piece of preferment. If the bishop had a grain of justice, the bishop offered it to me on his terms, and as I did not like the terms, I refused it. After that, I cannot complain. Terms. He had no right to make terms. I don't know about that, but it seems he had the power. But to tell you the truth, Nellie, I am well satisfied as it is. When the affair became the subject of angry discussion, I thoroughly wished to be rid of it altogether, same way as it was the first time, in the Warden. The minute it became a hot potato, he wanted out. But you did not want to go back to the old house, Papa? You told me yourself. Yes, my dear, I did. For a short time I did wish it, and I was foolish in doing so. I am getting old now, and my chief worldly wish is for peace and rest. Had I gone back to the hospital, I should have had endless contentions with the bishop, contentions with his chaplain, and contentions with the archdeacon. I am not up to this now. I am not able to meet such troubles, and therefore I am not ill-pleased to find myself left to the little church of St. Cuthbert's. I shall never starve, added he, laughing, as long as you are here, because she's wealthy. But he is absolutely right. The point that he's making here is absolutely right. It would have been a miserable job had he gone back there. Under the old bishop, no. But this new bishop would never have left him alone, and we know that. Slope or no slope. Mrs. Prouty would never have left him alone. That is wise. That's a wise conclusion to come to. But will you come and live with me, Papa? She said earnestly, taking him by his hands. If you will do that, if you will promise that, I will own that you are right. I will dine with you today, at any rate. No, but live here altogether. Give up that close, odious little room in High Street. My dear, it's a very nice little room, and you are quite uncivil. Oh, Papa, don't joke. It's not a nice place for you. You say you are growing old, though I am sure you are not. Am I not, my dear? No, Papa, not old, not as you say old, but you are quite old enough to feel the want of a decent room to sit in. You know how lonely Mary and I are here. You know nobody ever sleeps in the big front bedroom. It is really unkind of you to remain up there alone when you are so much wanted here. It is nice to be old and have a nice room to sit in. I will admit that. Unless it's up in Vermont, with bears coming to the window every 5 minutes. Even that was nice. Anyway, thank you, Nellie, thank you. But, my dear, if you had been living here, Papa, with us, as I really think you ought to have done, considering how lonely we are, there would have been none of this dreadful affair about Mr. Slope. That's pretty dirty, Poole. She would still have got his letter, mentioning her tresses. She would still have done nothing about it. Anyway, Mr. Harding, however, did not allow himself to be talked over into giving up his own and only little pied-à-terre in High Street. He promised to come and dine with his daughter, and to stay with her, and to visit her, and to do everything but absolutely live with her. It did not suit the peculiar feelings of the man to tell his daughter that though she had rejected Mr. Slope, and had been ready to reject Mr. Stanhope, some other, more favored suitor would probably soon appear, and that on the appearance of such a suitor, the big front bedroom may perhaps be more frequently in requisition than at present. Entirely right. This is a husband in the house, they're not going to want the father there. But doubtless such an idea crossed his mind, and it added its weight to the other reasons which made him decide on keeping still the close, odious little room in High Street. The evening passed over quietly and in comfort. Eleanor was always happier with her father than with anyone else. He had not, perhaps, any natural taste for baby worship. None of us do. But he was always ready to sacrifice himself, and therefore made an excellent third in the trio with his daughter and Mary Bold in singing the praises of the wonderful child. They were standing together over their music in the evening, and the baby having been put in the bed on the sofa, when the servant brought in a small note in a beautiful pink envelope. It quite filled the room with perfume as it lay upon the silver salver. Mary Bold and Mrs. Bold were both at the piano, and Mr. Harding was sitting close to them, with the cello between his legs, so that the elegancy of the epistle was visible to them all. "Please, ma'am, Dr. Stanhope's coachman says he is to wait for an answer," said the servant. Because that's ordinarily what would happen. In the age of email, this is all going to be Egyptian hieroglyphics. But once upon a time, if you were sending a letter and it wasn't a long, long way away, or even sometimes if it was, if you found a trusted bearer, which was the whole world, that was the whole world and everything in it. There was no postal service. If you found a trusted bearer, then if you could induce them, if they were close enough so they could make some sort of a round trip, you would induce them to stand and wait for a response so that you wouldn't have to wait, because then somebody else would have to find a trusted courier. But anyway, Eleanor got very red in the face as she took the note in her hand. She had never seen the writing before. Charlotte's epistles, to which she was well accustomed, were of a very different kind and style. She generally wrote on a large note paper. She twisted up her letters into the shape and sometimes into the size of cocked hats. She addressed them in a sprawling, manly hand, and not unusually added a blot or smudge, as though such were her own peculiar sign manual. The address of this note was written in a beautiful female hand, and the gummed wafer bore on it the impress of a gilt coronet. We've met this coronet before. Though Eleanor had never seen such a one before, she guessed that it came from the Signora. Such epistles were very numerously sent out from any house in which the Signora might happen to be dwelling, but they were rarely addressed to ladies. She's usually sending out letters to screw with the minds of men. When the coachman was told by the lady's maid to take the letter to Mrs. Bold, he openly expressed his opinion that there must be some mistake about it, whereupon the lady's maid boxed the coachman's ears. Had Mr. Slope seen in how meek a spirit the coachman took the rebuke, he might have learnt a lesson or two about both philosophy and religion. He's been raging about getting boxed in the ears since it happened. The note is as follows. Now we'll get the note, which is, of course, from the Signora. It's from Madeline Vesey Stanhope. "My dear Mrs. Bold, may I ask you as a great favor to call on me tomorrow? You can say what hour will best suit you, but quite early if you can. I need hardly say that if I could call upon you, I should not take this liberty with you. I partly know what occurred the other day, and I promise you that you shall meet with no annoyance if you will come to me. My brother leaves us for London today. From hence he goes to Italy." So he's going back to Carrara. Done. He's done in England. "It will probably occur to you that I should not thus intrude on you unless I had that to say which you might find of considerable moment. Pray therefore excuse me, even if you do not grant my request, and believe me, your very, very sincerely yours, M. Vesey Neroni." The three of them sat in consultation on this epistle for some 10 or 15 minutes, and then decided that Eleanor should write a line saying that she would go to the Signora the next morning at 12 o'clock. And that is the end of this chapter, in which, once again, Eleanor Bold is doing something she has said she knows is a bad idea. She has been doing this all through the book. All through the book. At every opportunity. She knows that something's a bad idea, and she does it anyway. Now, in this case, Mary Bold and Mr. Harding seem to be okay with her bad idea, but her original idea, her original impression to Bertie Stanhope, that I should never have any intercourse with your family again under any circumstances, was correct. That original idea was correct. The response she should have sent to the Signora's note is a curt no. I am not available. I will not be visiting. Simple as that. She's not going to have any more social dealings with these people. She has no danger to run from sending them a curt note. And she doesn't do it. She doesn't do it. Now, I understand why this is happening, not in terms inside the plot, but outside the plot I do, because, of course, we've already seen, Trollope has already shown us, that for some weird whim of her own nature, Madeline Vesey Stanhope has decided to help Mr. Arabin in his cause of loving Eleanor Bold. Why you would want the help of such a snake, I don't know. But she's decided that she's going to do it. And the reader remembers that. So, of course, there has to be a meeting between these two. Of course there does. It wouldn't happen in the continuity of the book, is what I'm saying. Unless Eleanor Bold is a prize-winning ninny, and maybe she is, she's certainly a world different from Trollope's big, decided, female characters like Mrs. Prouty, but there are also good ones. They show up in his books all the time. The big decided figures that are not wishy-washy, they are not ninnies, they have real complex presence. They are absolutely magnetic to read about. There's only one exception to that rule. There's only one very major female character in Trollope who is wishy-washy. She is a ninny, but she is nevertheless absolutely magnetic. We've already met her in many Trollope read-alongs. She's my favorite Trollope character. But Madeline, Eleanor Bold, she may just be a dope. What a dope. She may just be a dope. But she agrees. So we're going to get a confrontation between her and Madeline Vesey Neroni, that will probably have something to do with Mr. Arabin. Probably a lot, right? We can expect that. So we'll move on to that chapter next time. I don't know that it will satisfy you, but we'll give it a try. So I'll wrap this up for now, and we will reconvene next time. We're within sight of the end of Barchester Towers. So I will try to push through to the end, and then we'll be done with this. But I'm going to wrap this up for now. I'll be back, though. Thank you, BookTube.